G'day, Professor Joseph Drew. We have lots of comparisons in life, particularly in public life. We compare ratios from one council to another, from one school to another, from one student to another, from one hospital to another, from one state to another. Lots of people love this performance information and these comparisons, but there's some really big pitfalls in doing it. In this video, I'll go through what the pitfalls are and what the much better alternatives are. It's become a bit of a fad in the last 20 years. There's performance ratio indicators for just about everything you can name. And they're usually misused, and they really usually result in really bad decision making and really bad public policy outcomes. Now, I've proven this in lots of papers around the Fit for the Future, local government reforms and other reforms. Education, I've done research on that, the misuse of NAPLAN data in education, the poor reporting of it. Bevan and Hood's a very famous scholar from the UK, has shown us the disastrous outcomes when performance ratios and indicators were misused and poorly used, with bad decision making and bad public policy implications in England. It's something that people want to do, but most people don't spend the time to think through the full implications of precisely what they're proposing to do. Now, I agree with Aristotle, the most powerful type of rhetoric, the most powerful way of learning is through metaphor. So let's talk about two big mistakes, and then I'll give you two better alternatives. Mistake number one is comparing yourself to an entity with completely different growth characteristics. So I have one of those Withings scales, you hop on them every morning. It tells you your percentage fat, percentage muscle, percentage water, bone, all sorts of wonderful things, and it charts it over time. Great. My son can also jump on the same scales and get the same sort of information, and it'll graph it for him. Would it make sense for me to compare my weight and the way my weight is changing to the way Sam's weight is changing? He's a youngish teenager. He's still growing, still putting on muscle, whereas the opposite is true for old guys like me. Of course it wouldn't make any sense, just like it wouldn't make sense to compare an adult's weight to a baby's weight. Yet we often do that. We compare a local government in a growth area to a local government in a declining population area. Or we'll compare a school in a growth area to a school in a non-growth declining population area. It doesn't make sense, as that metaphor makes clear. Mistake number two is when we go one step worse. I can put Leibniz, our Dachshund, on the scale. He's a very cute Dachshund. And it will record his weight, fat content, etc. over time. Would it make sense for me to compare my weight trends to Leibniz's weight trends? It would make even less sense than doing it with Sam. At least Sam and I more or less share a diet and environmental constraints. It makes some sort of sense. We share the same sort of biology. He's got half my genes, things like this. It makes no sense at all to compare myself to a Dachshund. But we often do this in public policy. So we might compare a state school to a religious school, or a grammar private non-religious school. It doesn't make sense. They're completely different things. It's like comparing myself to Leibniz, a Dachshund. Or we might compare a rural local government to an urban local government. That often doesn't make sense, because usually rural local governments provide water and sewer services and urban ones don't. Okay, so it's a real problem. Sometimes, believe it or not, people will compare local government ratios for one state with local governments in another state. And that really doesn't make sense, because they're all governed by different pieces of legislation and they do really, really different stuff. So we need to be careful with mistake number two, because we make it an awful lot. So what are the alternatives? A better alternative to mistake number one and mistake number two is to compare yourself to yourself over time. That's better. It's what most of us do with our weight. It's not perfect though. If I had a really long graph and I'm comparing my weight when I was 18 years old in the military and a bit of a bodybuilder and all those sorts of things, to my weight now at 52 years of age, where I'm not active and I'm not a bodybuilder, I'm not trying to put on muscle, I'm actually, falling apart slowly, that wouldn't make too much sense, would it? So even comparing ourselves to ourselves is better than what we often do in the public policy sense, but it's not perfect because organisations do change a little bit over time. So the longer that time is, the less perfect that comparison might be. It's also ignoring the fact that things are happening out there in the policy environment that might affect how we're performing over time. So state governments bring in new things like ARIC committees and external auditing and things like that. That's all going to affect our production possibility frontier, how good we can be. And if we're just making comparisons over time, we're not thinking about all those external factors that are affecting our ability to achieve and perform, well, then we're not doing a fair comparison at all. Now, this is still far from perfect, but it's the best out of the things we've discussed so far, and that is to compare our relative performance of one entity to a stable group of peer entities over time. So we're not comparing ourselves to the peers directly. That's not what we're looking at here. We're comparing how we perform in relationship to the peers in 1 year to how we might perform in relationship to the same peer group in another year, compared to how we might perform to that same peer group in a subsequent year. Why is that slightly better? Well, we're looking mostly at ourselves, but by comparing our relative performance to a peer group, we're taking account of those external factors, state government policy, federal government policy, things that are happening in the external economy that are affecting our ability to achieve all that we want to achieve. So that's a much better comparison. You have to be very careful and cluey about how you do it, but that's certainly a much better comparison, and that's the case for local government, that's the case for education, that's the case for health. I hope this helped you to see the power of a metaphor. The things that we wouldn't do with our own weight are crazy. So why do we do them when we're comparing performance indicators, ratios, metrics between different types of organisations and entities? It doesn't make sense to do the things that we wouldn't do with our own weight. Look, I thank you for your time. I hope that's been helpful. Don't forget to subscribe, flick it on, leave a comment. It's what keeps me going. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.